It's Thursday, May 30th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker, coming to you from the offices of the New York Amsterdam News in Harlem. On this week's podcast, my special guest is anti-violence advocate A.T. Mitchell, who is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization Man Up Inc. He's going to be speaking with me today about the violence in the city. But first, I've got your AM News headlines. Coverage of the shootings over the Memorial Day weekend in Brooklyn are on our front page this week with the headline "Stop the Bullets." One man is dead after a shooting in NYCHA's Pink Houses in East New York, where a suspect fired at least 12 bullets. Hours later, during an unrelated incident, 2 teens were injured during a shooting at St. Andrew's Playground. More than a half dozen people have announced their candidacy to be the next Queens District Attorney after the recent passing of incumbent Richard Brown. The special election for the seat will take place on June 25th. 4 of the candidates spoke to the AM News about their platform. Ava DuVernay's When They See Us will premiere on Netflix on May 31st. The 4-part miniseries documents the Central Park jogger case from 1989 involving the 5 young men who were convicted and sentenced for the crime and later exonerated. A premiere was held at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And those are just a few of the many headlines that we have in this week's edition of the New York Amsterdam News. You can see all of those on newsstands right now, or you can see them online at amsterdamnews.com. Have to give a warm thank you to all of the people who have been listening to the podcast over this past week. We had a very big spike in the number of people that have been listening to the podcast, so we certainly appreciate you. And feel free to give us some feedback. If you hear something or you want to hear something on the podcast or you have a suggestion, go ahead and hit us up on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News, or you can also email me, Josh Barker, at josh.barker@amsterdamnews.com, and we'll do our very best to try and see if we can do something. If the people want it, we'll definitely give it to them. Well, my guest this week is A.T. Mitchell, who is the founder and executive director of the community-based organization Man Up Inc. in Brooklyn. He's with me to discuss the recent shootings along with his work in the community to stop the violence. A.T., can you tell us a little bit about what you know about the shooting that took place over the weekend?
I mean, outside of what we're trained not to talk about what we know, because when you talk about these shootings and homicide cases, these are open investigations.
Right.
I can't tell you about what I know.
Okay.
I can tell you about what is, potentially the things that are going on throughout the area, what has unfortunately happened. But I don't know any, sort of details about the fact outside of the fact that it was an unfortunate situation that happened in our community, that we are really working as a community, as a city to curb. And it just didn't happen in this particular case. Okay.
Well, I understand that, and I fully get that, and we appreciate you for telling us that. But tell us your reaction to the shooting. I mean, you obviously do know about it.
Yes.
Tell us.
Yes, we heard of it. Of course, it's not something that's not good news out here in East New York in the 7-5 in this part of Brooklyn. We've heard over the weekend. Of course, this was the official start of the summer, Memorial Day weekend. We are those of us that have worked the ground out here. We brace ourselves as the weather gets, kind of hot and it gets better. We have to kind of be better prepared to deal with these type of incidences. Unfortunately, we learned that there was a shooting at an event or some sort of community gathering, and 3 people were injured. 1 person, unfortunately, expired because of his injuries. And so, it just sends a real negative sort of overtone throughout the neighborhood, throughout the community. It's a bad taste in people's mouths. There's a family now that's unfortunately grieving, a community that's grieving, rather. There's perpetrators out there that are at large. There's illegal weapons that's still out large out there on the streets in somebody's reckless hands that can possibly be used again. And so we are very, out here, we're very disappointed that it has happened. But we are pretty much, like I said, preparing ourselves and training ourselves to be able to address these sort of incidences. Hopefully that it will not happen anymore. But I can't really make that call.
Okay. And tell us about how these incidents actually do start, because someone doesn't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm going to go kill someone and use a gun." Take us through the process of how this happens.
Well, it can happen in a number of different ways based on our work and our experience, man, and our research. Most of these type of incidences that happens are really, they derive from interpersonal disputes. And majority of the shootings that happen in our community are more little mediocre, frivolous sort of incidences or things that happen or misunderstandings that eventually, they exacerbate. They grow, and if left unattended, if there's no mediation, if there's nobody there that's trained or know how to resolve the conflict in a peaceful manner, normally people resort to this level of violence. And so, that's what happens all too common. And again, it's not something that we are happy or excited about. It's a very sad day in East New York, but we're working. We got some things that are working in our favor. We have, we're doing a lot of great work out here to really turn that stigma around as a community at large. We have, in certain pockets of East New York where I know where we're based, as far as Man Up Incorporated, where we're based in what we call catchment areas. We are not experiencing those levels of violence.
Okay.
And that's a positive thing because it says a lot about where our organization is based and what the work that we're doing within those catchment areas that reduces gun violence and violence overall. And we would love to, continue to do that work in that, particular part of East New York. But unfortunately, we're not based in that area where the shooting happened.
All right.
That was outside our catchment area. But, if we are fortunate to be able to receive the support, more support from the city, from private, whatever sort of donations or whomever, we can probably expand ourselves back to that region. But right now, we are very limited in our reach because the funding is very scarce.
Yeah. And one of our headline, I know you spoke to Nayaba Rende this week, our editor. She wrote the story, Stop the Bullets, Activists Decry Memorial Day / start of summer violence in BK. It seems that usually around this time of year, usually Memorial Day weekend, it's the unofficial start of summer, but in many of our communities, unfortunately, it's also the start, as our story says, of summer violence. Tell us about what that culture is, and Charles Barron said it best in the quote. Unfortunately, when the sun comes out, the guns come out. Our people must be a greater value of our people must put a greater value on life, is what he said. Tell us a little bit about the summertime and how you prepare and how some of the organizations prepare for some of the violence. And to me, it's unfortunate that that we have to look forward to this, every year. I know it's happened since I've been here at the AM News, but tell us a little bit about your work.
So when the spring and summer come around, everybody gets excited, right? Because that's the better part of the year because it's more warm and you figure it's a lot more bright and sunny and people can do more activities. And so that's what I would say when the sun comes out. We need to make sure that we bring more of our resources out too. Like as the sun is shining bright, we should make sure that our resources are as bright so that we can be able to dispose and deploy and, kind of like distinguish or distribute these resources throughout. Because really what is at the beginning of a lot of this stuff that's happening in our communities is a lot of unfortunate neglect. And a lot of despair that's happening in the neighborhoods of color mostly that have been overlooked for so long. And they lack the resources and the opportunities and services that any neighborhood would need to be able to flourish. For it to be able to turn itself around, we have to make sure that we are working closely with the community and with the people in the community to making sure that the resources and the opportunities are made available and assure that, there's always and to assure, a community that there's going to be a lot of good things happen. And I always say that, positive overrules negative all the time. So whenever you think about it in the summertime that comes around, we do brace ourselves. But I'm actually optimistic. I really feel confident that if we are armed with the necessary resources, and when I say we, I'm talking about community-based grassroots organizations like Man Up Inc. and Life Camp Inc. and GMAC Incorporated and 696 Queen Bridges and King of King Foundations and Brownsville Think Tank Matters and, Brownsville In and Brownsville In and Violence Out, and organizations that we are part of a network throughout the city of New York. if we are armed with the necessaries, we are bold enough and willful enough to want to go into those areas and really work that, neighborhood well, so that a lot more positive things are offered up and they are given out, and people begin to change their behaviors because their mind, their thinking is changing as to how it relates to when they have issues. Mm-hmm. So I really, like me, I don't look at it from a glass half empty. I look at it from a glass half full perspective. I really think that we are on to doing something with the crisis management system that we have in New York City, mm-hmm. which has the cure violence model that derives out of Chicago at the core. Combined, this particular method has been proven to reduce gun-related violence in neighborhoods like East New York, across the city, and actually, throughout the state and across the country. And now, with that said, we have a remedy to deal with the violence, the disease of violence. Mm-hmm. And all we need to do is increase, our portions of this remedy, and to make sure that we are able to continue the work that we have all been doing, the bold work, the courageous work that we have all been doing now for some years. Yeah. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, Josh.
And I look at it from that way, too, because we see these stories. I know for me, whenever I see a story like the one that we had, over the Memorial Day weekend about the violence that happened, yes. I know for me, it's always a good feeling to know that there are people on the ground, that there are foot soldiers in our community who are out there fighting the good fight and really fighting against this. I mean, the community is not taking this lying down, which is really awesome.
Right, no question about it. Definitely. We thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
one of our, supporters.
Yeah, no, and it's so important that we all support communities like yours and Life Camp and other organizations all across the city, because what I want you to talk about is you mentioned earlier that there is some lacking, and you do need some things. And perhaps the community can help fill the void because there's things that you need that you don't have. Tell us about what you need exactly and what is lacking, so people can just kind of
without
know.
question. I mean, as right now we stand really pretty vulnerable as community-based grassroots organizations that are doing innovative work and non-traditional approaches to dealing with this issue. We are hiring people who nobody else would ever hire, and we are training them up and giving them an assignment to go back into their neighborhoods and to really go after the people who may perpetrate violence, right, if left unattended. And let's prioritize that population. Let's get them in. Let's see how we can better help them help themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's really something that has not been happening over the years, over the previous decades. And now we have this approach to dealing with it. I think that it's important that organizations like ours are supported through multiple streams and multiple ends. Right now, we're very vulnerable because we have more government funded, and which means we're vulnerable, right? If the politics change, then there may be a change in our support for the work that we're doing in terms of the funding. Mm-hmm. And then also, with government, you oftentimes have, a double-edged sword. You damned if you do, you damned if you don't.
Right.
And so really what we need to do is really turn, like you said, to the masses of people for really whom we really work for, and who we rely on to keep our doors open, to keep our phones on, to keep our teams that are out there on the streets armed with the resources. And so the support, it comes from people like a common, everyday, New Yorkers, people who respect that they understand that this is a job that not everybody can do, but they can probably play a part in it by just being a donor, by going to our websites and looking up our donate buttons and knowing that we are all 501c3 organizations. We have the same tax-exempt status as the Red Cross, the Blue Cross, the Salvation Army, and any other large non-for-profit. You get the same credit as you would if you made a donation to the United Negro College Fund, as you would if you made a donation to Man Up Incorporated, because we are tax deductible as well. And we are a charity agency, and we really rely on our community to really back us up and be able to fill up the voids where we don't have the government being able to fork it all over. And also with that, I would say that, to the government who has come to us and asked us to play our position and our role in this fight against violence, And we are willful to do it because we love our communities. We have a lot of pride in our neighborhoods, and we want to be able to be a part of the solution versus seen as part of the problem. You can't have it both ways.
Right,
You can't ask us to be the men and women on the front line who put our lives on the line to be able to mediate these conflicts, these very dangerous potential conflicts, but at the same time you're coming at us. Right. In one breath. You can't, if we're going to be partners, we have to be true partners, and we have to be respectful because of the work that we do. We're novice in this work. In terms of nonprofit management. For the most part, we're learning on the go. It's like an on-the-job training, because really we took up this call to action, and it's called a duty. And we just got into this work by, like, as you know, with Man Up Inc., as the unfortunate death of Deshaun Hill, when that 8-year-old was shot 15 years ago, I mean, I was already involved in community on the leadership level, on the activist level, on the organizing level, but I even thought it was more that I can do, and that's when I thrust myself even more into wanting to do more, and that's how Man Up Inc. was born. But I did not foresee this. I did not expect this. So we're learning on the go.
Right,
but the government has to be patient with us and understand that they're not going to come out into our communities and with the resources that we need, with the information and the capacity so that we can stand tall to really fight this fight. It's almost like it's almost like a renege. You can't renege. Now, if you ask us to do something and we're doing it, you got to now come to our support as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things I do want to, I've followed you and your organization for several years in my time here at the Amsterdam News. You guys do fantastic work, but I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have is that you don't just act when something happens. You guys are doing
Absolutely.
things 365. Tell us a little bit about the services and the programs that you all offer.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
Josh,
absolutely.
Thank you. This is definitely a 365-day operation.
Right.
We are not the people who respond to emergencies solely. We are the people who are on the ground day in and day out, night in and night out. We are here on holiday weekends, as we just seen demonstrated with Memorial Day weekend, and we are actually out there in the trenches when people are home asleep. We really work really diligently to provide as well meaningful services that we possibly can. So, like, for example, at Man Up Inc., a lot of people just sometimes think that we are an anti-gun violence organization, and in fact, we are. But more so, we do a host of other different program services. We have an after-school day program and school-based operations. We have our own community centers that we oversee and operate. We do a lot of other work in helping people with job development and helping people get better prepared for employment by providing them with the necessary certifications, soft skill trainings. We do a lot of work with fathers and parenting. We do a lot of work in the media and the arts. We have also a recreation and sports arm of Man Up Incorporated, where, we have a host of different activities of different athletic activities year-round. We're really one of those one-stop shops, right? So we're trying to do all that we can so that our community can say that, that there is a beacon in our neighborhood like this. But again, we need the support. We cannot do this alone. It is very difficult for me as the executive officer of this agency to raise the money every year and fall short of it. I can't meet my funding goals every year because there's a lot of work that's going on. But I just need for people, if they could respectfully just keep our organizations in mind. Again, we are citywide now. We have True to Life out in Staten Island. We have Street Corner Resources up in Harlem. Right. You have Release the Grip and Bragg and all these other great organizations, SOS organizations throughout the city. Save Our Streets. We have GOSO, Save, which is in East Harlem. There's a number of us now that are out here doing this work. And again, I think if people could just turn to any one of them in their respective boroughs and try to support them, it would really make a big difference.
It certainly would. And you mentioned Save Our Streets, SOS. I live in the Bronx and I see them quite a bit, so I really see the presence in the community of
Yes, sir.
organizations like Man Up, Life Camp, and Aisha Sekou's organization, who I've known her for many years, as
Yes,
well
sir.
as with the work that SOS does.
You
Just
got Rock Safe. You got Rock Safe Streets.
yep.
There's people out in the far Rockaways.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely.
we are
Yeah.
very blessed to be able to have a lot of different agencies now that are involved in the work. We appreciate the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. We have an Office to Prevent Gun Violence now that is solely dedicated to deal with this issue and committed to deal with this issue. They're an awesome partner of ours. There is other, like the Department of Health, which is another one of our partnering city
Okay.
agencies
All
that we work with, because the way we see violence, Josh, we treat it as a public health crisis. It's just
Yes.
so
Yes.
it's
Yes.
to us, violence is a disease, right? Because once somebody is shot or stabbed, it is something that ripples throughout the community. The trauma that is associated with that violence, it is long lasting.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and
It
it is
is.
something that people cannot get over. So a lot of the anguish, a lot of the stress, a lot of the, just the grief, it is something that is permanent, and it really takes a long time for people to learn how to deal with it. And that's the work that we do day in and day out.
One question I certainly wanted to ask you was that in one of the shootings that happened this weekend, the victims who were injured, they did not die. They're expected to survive. It was two 16-year-olds and a 19-year-old. So you have children, young people under the age of 18, under 21, who are victims of shootings. And unfortunately, sometimes there are a lot of our teens, young people, are suspects, unfortunately, too. What is your advice to parents? A lot of parents always ask the question, what can I do to make sure that my child doesn't get involved in this, or that my child is not a victim?
You started with some age groups, and that age group that you just talked about is what we call the vulnerable community, or the vulnerable population.
Okay.
The 16 to 24-year-olds, unfortunately, are the majority of gun violence victims that are shot and or killed are 16 to 24-year-olds. Unfortunately, the majority of the perpetrators who commit these vicious acts right now, the majority are 16 to 24-year-olds. So that's a very vulnerable population that we focus a lot of attention on, and a lot of our resources is devoted into that community, into that population. These are young people, man, who are not quite full-blown adults. And unfortunately, when we were teenagers, we didn't make the best decisions either. So sometimes they're not realizing the fullness of their consequences. But nonetheless, this is why we call it a public health crisis, because more 16 to 24-year-olds, African American and Latino youth, the number one cause of death is gun-related homicide. Okay? That's their number one cause of death for a 16 to 24-year-old African American or Latino youth in New York City. And I think that's even nationwide. Gun violence is their number one cause of death. That's a health crisis. That is a serious, large, cry out, and we have to look at it from a national level, from a state level, and from a local level. If that is the case, then what are we doing? And like you said, parents. There's a lot that parents can do. They are already doing a lot, and I think that I just want to commend those parents out there, because there is this sort of syndrome or mishap that people think that parents don't care, and parents of young people in our communities don't engage them and don't try to intervene or even raise them up in the right way, and that is furthest from the truth.
I agree.
I was raised by a single parent mother who had 8 children. And she did everything, that she could to instill the morals and the principles and those, manners into me and my brothers and sisters, so that we can grow up to become productive people. But there's a time when we step outside the home and we go out into the neighborhood, into the streets, and our friends and our peers and sometimes become more influential than our parents. And so what I would say to people who have teenagers, and I'm sure it's a worrisome to have a teenager nowadays. I mean, I can relate. They have to just make sure that they stay as close to them as they possibly can, communicate with them and talking with them, watching out for them, and also watching out for their friends and the company that they keep. Right. Because a lot of times, young people are thrust into these situations just because of where they live. It's not that they want to grow up or go outside and join a group of people who are doing negative stuff. sometimes they are also targets of violence. And when they are targeted because they say they live in a certain housing development or live in a certain community, you know, the retaliation thing is almost automatic, right? Because you kind of guilty just because of circumstance, because of where you live. But I want to commend the parents who are out there that are engaged, and are involved. I'm a parent that if I take my son someplace, I'm going to take him and his friends there too, right? There's more that we can do. We can be, mentors. Parents can be, mentors and counselors for young people out there in the street. Don't just walk by these young people because they're not your direct, relative.
Yeah.
Speak to them, engage them, talk with them, support them. If you see them out there balling and playing basketball, bring them some water, some lemonade, little things like that. If you'd be surprised how that would be received and how, that goes a long way. But don't be the person what I call a couch activist, right? They sit and they watch television, they point at the evening news, they read the newspapers, they always got so much to say, they have the opinion, but they're not out there. They're not engaged. And I'm not saying everybody has to be the Marines like how me and my colleagues and comrades are, but maybe they can play a significant role from above. They could be the Air Force,
right.
Right. And they can just help us with, dropping down the resources that we may need to be able to keep our neighborhood safe. So there's something that everybody can do.
Okay.
And really we just got to do it as a community. That's the only way out of this.
Yeah. Lastly, what's the best way folks can get in touch with you? You can give us your phone number, email address, web address, and I know that you guys actually have locations, but I know you have a main location for Man Up Inc. in Brooklyn. If you can give us the address, we'd love to hear
Thank
what
you,
that is.
brother. Yeah, so we welcome anybody to reach out to us. Our direct telephone number for the last 15 years is actually 718-498-2320. That's 718-498-2320. Or folks can visit our website and browse our website and go through our website and leave us comments. And also there's a button on there on how to donate or how to be involved. They can visit our website at manupinc.org, which is www.manupinc.org. These are the best ways that people can come in and get in touch with us. We do have, like I said, a number of locations now. We're blessed to have grown over the years. I'm very proud of that fact. We continue to grow every year. We're learning more so every year. And, but if you really want to be able to stay in touch with us and maybe reach out for us and see how we can be able to partner going forward, those are the two best ways.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, A.T. We definitely want to have you back on the podcast. This is such an important issue to me and the Amsterdam News and our staff, and we're so glad that you were able to come on, and fill us in on this information. So we really appreciate it.
Likewise, I appreciate you, Josh. I appreciate the whole entire team up there at the the Amsterdam News. You guys, we do without the Amsterdam News here in New York, right?
Absolutely.
And so I'm very, very happy. Anywhere I can help, anywhere I can participate, by all means, you know how to get in touch with me. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Likewise.
All right, thanks.
All right, peace.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.